The energy is so great. This is going to be a good episode, I can already tell.
I'm pretty sure nobody would have foresaw being able to order things from a large online retailer using Alexa.
We transitioned into Google Cloud. We needed to be a bit more dynamic, a hell of a lot more efficient, huge step. We're only as strong as your weakest link, right? So people are not just spoofing domains and phishing, but they're taking over domains that you own.
Welcome to the Connectivity Cloud Podcast, the podcast that provides expert insights into the cloud and IT landscape. I'm Mark Dembo, and each month we'll explore key topics like scaling secure infrastructure, tackling emerging risks, and staying ahead of the latest trends. Whether you're managing multi-vendor environments or navigating cloud modernization, this is the show for you, delivering practical advice for today's decision makers.
Today, we have two exciting guests. Andy Dean, Head of Technical Operations at AllSaints, and Christian Reilly, Field CTO at Cloudflare. Andy has spent over 20 years leading technical operations across multiple industries with a focus on IT transformation and e-commerce scalability. At AllSaints, he's spearheaded key cloud migrations and security improvements to ensure that the brand remains resilient and high-performing even during the busiest sales periods. Christian, with his extensive background in technology leadership, has helped enterprises navigate the complex intersection of performance, security, and scalability. As a field CTO at Cloudflare, Christian's work focuses on helping businesses tackle the growing challenges in the digital age, ensuring seamless and secure cloud operations at scale. Today, we'll discuss how AllSaints is evolving its digital infrastructure, the role that Cloudflare has in this transformation, and the critical balance between security and performance as both brands continue to scale and innovate in an increasingly connected world. Andy, Christian, welcome to the podcast.
Morning, Mark. Morning, Christian.
Good morning, Andy, and good morning, Mark. Thank you for having us both on with you. It's a true pleasure.
Oh, the energy is so great. This is going to be a good episode, I can already tell. Typically, when I have new guests on, what I like to do is a little bit of like a light warm-up question. And it's typically technology related, and this time it's going to be a little bit nostalgic. You both have been in the web and tech space for a long time, each over 20 years, right? I'm curious, like which innovation or change over that time period still blows your mind? I can give an example, right? So I was born and raised in Germany, but my grandma lived in Canada. And I vividly remember calling my grandma in my childhood. It was like crazy expensive. We always used these like weird prefix codes. And you had to like make sure with time difference that both were at home. And it was super tough. And nowadays, you can just FaceTime someone full HD from like a mountaintop to the desert at opposite end of the world. And it's basically free, right? To me, that is mind blowing. To me, that's such a great shift. Christian, is there something that comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I always go back to this one, Mark, when people ask me, like, what's the most impactful technology you've seen? And I'm going to say GPS, right? Because I remember being, well, I guess I sort of remember being young, but like when I first got in a car and passed my driving test and was able to drive, you had to have a little book with you, right? That we used to call in the UK an A to Z, right? And it had like all the road names, all the locations. And if you were going somewhere you'd never been before, you literally had to figure out how to drive and read the thing at the same time, right? So if you think about, I always get really, really, really like blown away when you look at how simple GPS is. Every car, every airplane, every ship, every bus, everything relies on this thing. And you would think that from a technology point of view, it must be really complicated, but it's really so simple as an end user. So you get in the car, you use your maps, you use whatever. And the more I think about that and just think about, there's all these things up there in the low Earth and higher orbits that are directing us in milliseconds to destinations, no matter what transport we use. To me, it's just absolutely staggering. So my favorite thing is GPS for sure.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Andy, how does that look like for you?
Well, yeah, and the worst thing is we still get lost, right, Christian? Even with GPS and Google Maps. So, where's the weak point? For me, it's quite similar. For me, mine is kind of mobile tech and more so security. So I'm sure we all had a particular brand of mobile phone where to lock and unlock was just two buttons. It was a 2-key sequence that anyone could do. So, you left your phone out on a table in a pub and anyone could unlock it and send text messages or do whatever they need to do. Whereas Now you've got biometrics, right? You've got fingerprints and you've got face IDs. And I'll never forget the first time I got a modern phone. I will say, I won't say any brands. And I didn't believe it was going to work. I said, "There's no way this is going to get my fingerprint," and I'm testing it on other people's devices. And no, that blows my mind still. That on a handheld personal device, we have got biometric technology that can identify that it's you opening that and not someone else doing the 2 key sequence. So yeah, mobile tech and security for me.
Yeah. I very much remember those clunky, bulky mobile handsets, extend the antenna, do a phone call. We've come a long way. Super interesting. I could geek out on this like all day, but frankly speaking, we have other stuff we also want to talk about. Going perhaps a little bit from like a personal level to the business commerce side of things, right? And the commerce in general, but I guess also AllSaints, you've made like a lot of progress on digital transformation, right? Going from predominantly brick and mortar retail to more of an omni-channel approach. Can you walk us through some key technology shifts that enabled this transition for you?
Yeah, certainly. I think that there's 2 major shifts that we made. We back in 2019, we transitioned into Google Cloud from a managed supplier, which did the job for us on our old tech stack, but we needed to be a bit more dynamic, a hell of a lot more efficient. We needed to kind of absorb new techs really quickly without having to redesign the whole platform. So moving over to Google Cloud Platform, huge step. Took a while. It took about 9 months, and I was the PM, and I'm not a PM, so but we landed, we did it, and that just opened up so many tech avenues, but also cut out a lot of costs. So it was win-win. But that was kind of phase 1. Kind of the bigger phase was using our selection of partners and more specifically SaaS tools. So we were in a very much in-house kind of way of working and developing. We develop our own software, but we're not a software house. We're a fashion retailer. So we're trying to do a different kind of role that we're probably not really set out to be. Now, you need tech resource, right? There's no doubt. You can't outsource everything, right? You need to have a little bit of control of what tech you manage. But we weren't big enough to manage a whole software cycle on multiple platforms. So we kind of made a shift as, Robert, let's choose the right partners. Let's move over to SaaS that complement. Not just picking one because it's what our ex-CFO used, or or somebody who knew someone also uses them. So using it, what's our tech stack like? What does it match? What are we looking to do in the future? Looking at more than 1 year, the future plan, what we're looking to integrate into this solution, and trying to find a better mix so we don't have to add on additional SaaS to fulfill the requirement that we didn't have at the start, kind of thing. So yeah, so we still got in-house, don't get me wrong, but we've kind of shifted some of the big software solutions over to purpose-built that got thousands of developers working for their platforms, right? Leveraging their scale, and then we just plug in the tailored bit, the niche bit that we want to make as a bit more of a USP. So those 2 things, leveraging the cloud, getting the most out of it, but then also leveraging the SaaS products that are out there.
Yeah, that boundary of getting built versus buy, right? I mean, like, that is so tough as an organization. I think you're always thinking about, okay, cool. We are the special snowflake. Realistically speaking, though, there are so many other customers that also have the same like requirements, right? And then you just need to customize the market standard or whatever that might be to your needs, which still requires a lot of resources and processes and experience, right, to get that right, and you continue iterating. But yeah, super interesting. Christian, you talk to a lot of companies at Cloudflare. I know that because I know your travel schedule. Have you seen other companies, especially retailers, and talk to them? How do they approach this transformation? What are patterns that you've seen, like from companies like AllSaints that have gone through similar shifts?
Yeah, I think, fundamentally, whether it's a bricks and mortar retailer moving into e-commerce, whether it's a full e-commerce, with less bricks and mortar, and actually those trends are quite interesting because we typically see a lot of our bigger, let me call it retail customers, who are very much a mix of traditional bricks and mortar, but then moving more and more of that business to e-commerce. And that's really as a result of how the customer behavior is changing, right, which I think we would all recognize. There are actually a few examples, which is kind of a true anti-pattern, I think. There's a couple of big customers that we have who started off purely online, but the success of certain brands have caused them to think about opening high street versions of the online brand. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic, because you would think that, from a trend perspective, you tend to see less bricks and mortar and more digital. But this particular customer, the trend is reversed there, where they were so successful with digital that they've brought one of those brands into the high street. So it's kind of an interesting, just an observation. Going back to e-commerce, Mark, I would say that a bit like retail banking, right? Some of the more established, let's say, longer term, more recognizable customers and names that everybody would know, I think they've had very complicated, just as Andy was saying, very complicated, homegrown, self-developed e-commerce platforms, just like we see with retail banking. I'd say that retail banking is one of the most complicated worlds there is, because of all the traditional systems that have been built on, iteration after iteration after iteration. And, if you're a COBOL developer now, then God bless you, because you're commanding a significant amount of money from a contracting point of view, right? So if you think about that as a parallel, I think modernization of that core e-commerce platform is something we see over and over again. Now, that could be, as Andy was saying, and it's interesting because I think what we've seen is some organizations trying to modernize their own e-commerce platforms, and use the same kinds of patterns and things that we would see, whether that's back end for front end, whether that's strangler patterns, whether that's containerization. We see that a lot. But just as Andy was saying, we see a lot of organizations who are saying, you know what, it's the end of the road for this technology. It just is not sustainable. It's too expensive. It's too risky. And so the core e-commerce platforms are being migrated to, just as Andy said, companies who are professional at providing those highly configurable, highly functional e-commerce platforms, but without the need for, folks like Andy's to be expert on them from a technology point of view, much more at the business configuration level. So that's kind of a couple of things that we see for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. One thing that I've been thinking of while you two were talking, right, is like one thing is like none of this is greenfield, right? Everyone is dealing with legacy, with brownfield, and also like the nature of the business, right? It is just the amount of complexity. I think if I got this right, we did a little bit of a pre-discussion, and your business has over 100 different vanity domains. I can barely imagine how like complex it must be to operate at this scale globally and not like miss an important piece of misconfiguration or introduce some security vulnerability just by like always looking something. How do you and your organization deal with this insane amount of complexity?
Yeah, it's a good question, because like I say, you're only as strong as your weakest link, right? So people are not just spoofing domains and phishing, but they're taking over domains that you own, if you don't configure it correctly. So we're very, very much on it. We do have tools in place that don't just look at our primary domains, right? Everyone knows our big domain. We use it for all the countries in the world. That's the top one, but there's like I say, 100 smaller ones that can be abused, right? People can see an email come from a domain that we own, and I've checked on the lookup, and it's owned by AllSaints Retail, so therefore it must be legit. I'm going to respond and whatever. So we have to make sure that they're all for us. So using tools out there that look at our portfolio, our domain portfolio, that check for little bits like SPF records, DMARC records. We get an idea of which ones have been missed, and if we do have an open door for one of the mail servers, for example, but also the security headers. So even though we generally just forward on these websites to the primary domain, we still have to manage those redirects, manage those redirect rules, and that's where we use Cloudflare Workers. I have a template that I just add a route to as and when we buy a new domain, and it just pulls in, locks down all the headers, prevents iframes, all that stuff.
Andy, I'll stop you right there. Two things. What are DMARC records for perhaps people that are not operating on this level? Why are they important? And the second thing is Cloudflare Workers on a high level. Can you explain it in like a sentence?
Certainly, of course. Well, let me start. So DMARC, SPF, they're basically gateway records. So when you send mail, you kind of authorize certain systems and even IP addresses to say these are legitimate senders of emails from my company. If it's not on this list, then your ESP, email service provider, should check these DNS variables and say, you're not allowed to send on that, therefore I'm going to mark you as spam. So when you get that wrong, and when you have it open, basically anybody with a mail server can send on behalf of that domain. So it's really important that...
Oh, okay. And that is a big business security risk, eh?
Huge, especially when that domain is also used by our senior retailers, or our senior directors and our CFO. So in theory, they could then send an email as one of our directors, and that could get very dangerous in terms of malicious payments, requests, etc. So we have to be sure. We have to be sure that only authorized mail servers can send emails to internal, external, and obviously our customers. So DMARC, SPF. SPF's kind of the older version. DMARC's a lot more strict. Sure, it's a key you have to have generated from source, but all for the benefit of ensuring our domain sending emails are secure. So that's DMARC. And so Cloudflare Workers, it's a tool I've used many years. And I'm sure Christian's going to correct me when I get it wrong, but it's basically edge compute on the network. So we predominantly use JavaScript, but very heavily customizable. You can do a lot of things in there. We actually do geo redirects. We extract the browser code from the country code from the user's browser, and with that we can make a decision. Actually, we've got a better website for you. It's in your language, in your currency. It will send you there, all at the edge. I'm not running that infrastructure within our stack. I'm doing it all on the Cloudflare edge. So we do that. We also can add security headers. So rather than configure them at a server layer, again, inside our stack, we can do them at the edge. And this is especially pertinent when we don't have a server for a vanity domain. We don't want to run a server for a vanity domain because that in itself is cost, for one, but it's also vulnerability. Right? I'm having to patch and maintain a server. I'm having to make sure Apache or Nginx is up to date. I don't want to do that, I'll be honest. Not that I'm lazy, but I'm efficient. So that's, again, what we use Cloudflare Workers for. That edge compute that's all managed by Cloudflare, but I can configure what I put in that container, and this is where I lock down security headers, make sure that nobody can iframe in any part of our domain or other domains into those domains that we own. So very simple. You can do it once. Once you get the core worker set up, you're then just adding routes, which is domains or paths. So very quick and easy.
Cool. So that sounds to me really smart, right? Number one is, okay, cool. Use automated tools basically to check that all your properties are properly configured, ideally, right? Like minimize the human error, or have a system check, so to say. And then basically, okay, focus on your core properties out there. And for all other things, find a tool that allows you to do the configuration with as little overhead as possible. For this, you use Cloudflare right now, right? With this customizable Workers platform. And then basically make sure that you don't have to operate thousands of different services that basically do very little. Just have Cloudflare do the heavy lifting there. That makes a ton of sense. I like that. And also is a little bit of a separation of concerns, right? You manage your business logic in the backend on the cloud, as you say, right, for your core, and then use Cloudflare as a separate configuration layer just before that. And I've always wondered how those country redirects work, where I'm traveling and all of a sudden I get a different website. So that makes a lot of sense. Christian, I'm curious, you've been both on the vendor side and the customer side, right? Do you have any recommendation on what customers can and should do to prevent fragmentation and make large footprints, like physical and digital, more manageable? And perhaps reduce also exposure, I guess, at the same time, right? If you can manage it better, most likely you reduce your exposure. At least that's my hypothesis.
Yeah, well, I think that might be a detailed answer, Mark. And I think, like anything, I think it depends on where each customer's starting from. I'll give you an example of the big digital transformation project I did way back when. we started off understanding what we had in terms of the application landscape, right? Because obviously, like Andy was saying before, there's always a decision to be made around what applications do I need for the business. Then there's a strategy around build versus buy, as you said. And of course, that buy doesn't always mean SaaS. It can be buy as in a commercial piece of software like SAP. Now, of course, there's a cloud version of SAP, but I would say most SAP installations I've ever seen are still largely, on premises, which is totally normal, versus creating your own ERP system. Right? So I think there's all sorts of questions there. And then the other one, there's several actually, but I think the other big two, I would say are simplification of core infrastructure is a big one, because, when you think about large organizations that have, whether that's physical retail stores, offices, factories, whatever, that network gets pretty complicated pretty quickly, right? And I think when you add in M&A to that, or entering new markets, or buying other companies, or buying other parts of a business, that you always inherit something that you didn't ever design, right? So you're continually in this kind of evolution mode. I just think some really strong fundamentals around, understanding like simple things like what's the target architecture? How do we get to that target architecture without allowing too much drift? Because, there's always, my experience, no matter what you do, no matter how you plan for it, the business always throws you a curveball, right? Whatever that curveball looks like. But I think being able to fit things in that target architecture, and of course we're seeing that, from an application point of view, relative to some of the things that hopefully are going to evolve in platform engineering and developer portals, all those things where the target architecture is represented in some kind of code. And I'm going to use IAC as an example there. So, building up cloud landing zones and making sure that people know what frameworks are permitted, investing a lot in the DevOps tool chain, automation, orchestration, all of that really helps with complexity and drift over time in my experience. So I think there's a lot to be done there. I'm saying it like it's simple, and it's really not. You've got to always balance that question of what the business needs with how fast you can respond, how you deal with those, let me call them exceptions to target architectures. And then of course you've got, and I think this is a really interesting one, and maybe Andy can give some comments on this. I think there's always a concern, we've had historically, and when you're deploying physical hardware and you're deploying things on your own network or at the edge or whatever that you own, you've always got to be worried about the attack surface management, right? So, every piece of hardware has another CVE. Every other week, something else happens. When you move that to SaaS, and I'm talking, from a sort of an application strategy, there's usually less reliance over time on the physical hardware, because the way you're connecting and what you put in place, whether that be some secure service edge stuff, CASB, secure web gateways, whatever, you still got the challenge of the attack surface, and you've still got the challenge of making sure that you know what's in that estate. But I think what you do over time, and as Andy said, you kind of outsource the trust, not just from a security perspective, but from a performance and an operational point of view. That's a story we talk about a lot, Cloudflare, Mark, as you know, in terms of the size and the scale of the network that we've got, and the no single points of failure. So all of that, and especially when you think about resilience is now the key word, right? It used to be protection, now it's resilience. And when we're thinking about resilience, especially in retail, and I know just a few months ago here in early 2025, we've seen some really bad examples of what can happen when things go wrong in UK retail, right? So I think everybody kind of knows what happened there. So I just think it's, complexity is part of life in technology, especially in big companies, and especially in companies who are, making more use of digital in different ways. I think we're spreading kind of the complexity out a little bit, but I do think it's possible to tame it as long as you have some of those fundamental pieces in place.
Yeah. Makes a ton of sense. Christian, we also talked before this, right? And you mentioned a little bit like there are concerns around security, right? You mentioned resiliency already. One particular story or angle you had in mind, like, is protecting loyalty programs and the attack vector from there. Just because there's like high value customer data. Can you talk a little bit about that? I'm super curious. I found this quite interesting but we only reached the surface. So would love to learn more there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting. The whole thing around loyalty programs and loyalty activity comes up in a lot of conversations with CISOs of not just in retail, but anybody that has e-commerce. I think a few years ago, there was a famous attack where an airline had had its loyalty scheme compromised. And because there was no sort of real-time detection on that, and because the techniques and the tactics that were used were kind of novel in the way that what was happening was things like, password spraying, credential stuffing were being used for account takeover in essence. But then once the bad actors were in, they were using the loyalty points to exchange for things like gift cards or other things that then, had a whole other transaction that wasn't really traceable. And so, I think I was reading something a few weeks ago that said, I think it was in 2024, that loyalty fraud cost companies about $4 billion globally, which, we always talk about credit card fraud and everybody points to PCI DSS and that sort of thing. And I think we're probably getting better at that in general. But what was really interesting was that the data told me that a compromised loyalty account sells for between $10 and $50 on the dark web, whereas a stolen credit card information only sells for $5. And I think the reason for that is that there's a lot more sort of, let me say, focus and a lot more fraud detection on credit card because it's been the number one thing that we've seen get used, versus this, I'm going to use this to create other transactions and almost create this swap market when I've got a compromised loyalty scheme. And so the third bit of that, Mark, which I think is really interesting, and again, maybe Andy has a view on this, but what some of the forensics told us was that those loyalty accounts were not only, compromised using the, let's say, really unsophisticated things like password spraying or credential stuffing. They were actually exposed via poor API security and poor API management. So you think about like what happens with loyalty schemes. Oftentimes they're actually separate from the core systems. So there's kind of some kind of integration, and that integration oftentimes extends out into third parties. In doing so, the API piece becomes really important. And so going back to let's say 2023, 2022, whatever. PCI DSS in its version then didn't actually include API control in the spec. So it was all about securing that credit card transaction again. What's been interesting to see, and again, I'm sure Andy has a view on this, that PCI DSS 4 and 401 now has controls in there about API access, which I think is great from a security perspective. It's great for us, because obviously, we talk about API security a lot in the context of Cloudflare's overall portfolio, what we do there. But I just think it's been really interesting. I think, every time I go to a supermarket, every time I go online, there's always the loyalty bit, right? So I think the loyalty element, whether that's to get, instant access to special offers, or whether that's to get, literally more points so I can get some free whatever a bit later on. I think that's a really, to me anyway, as a consumer, it's become really important in where I go. So if I go to the same supermarket, the reasons for that are, so I can get better deals and I can get, whatever, and, save money somewhere on the line. It's the same with fashion. It's the same with electronics. It's the same. So I'd be interested to get Andy's view on that, because obviously, customer loyalty is a key part of customer retention, but it's also a key part of customer trust. And if that trust is broken as a result of, an exposed loyalty scheme, I think there's a whole reputation risk element there that perhaps is, more important to the providers than many might recognize.
Yeah, 100%, Christian. I mean, we are early days in our loyalty program, and I think one of the enablers was moving over to a SaaS provider that helped. But historically, we found our bad actors have focused on our gift cards. I guess it's quite similar. So you're right, with PCI DSS, you're generally locked in, right? You've got you're using iframes that are hosted by your payment gateway, or APIs or cartridges. So you're safe, you're protected. The liability shift, you're done. However, the gift cards is not as simple as that. Doesn't fall into that category. It's a different provider. It's generally a PIN, a card and a PIN, versus a CV2, a billing address, right? So it's a bit more exposed. So this is another area where in the past where we've seen abuse or attempted abuse, and this is where we've kind of leveraged our rate limiting as well. So if we see endpoints being particularly harassed by certain user agents' IPs, we can just rate limit off, we can identify that someone's having a go without impacting our customer, because this is the balance, right? You don't want to annoy a legitimate customer who just wants to spend their birthday money on your website. You don't want to have to jump through hoops and gates, and you want to make it as easy as possible for the good, but really hard for the bad, right? So leveraging stuff. I mean, it's through Cloudflare as well. The rate limiting, endpoints that are particularly susceptible to this kind of mass abuse, will rate limit and block them, at the edge. IPs, we're not troubling, because downstream, now it happens with payment gateways as well as gift card. We're paid per transaction, so there's a fiscal risk, even though, yeah, great, hey, you got blocked, all right, that's the wrong pin, we haven't been defrauded. You still cost us a bit of money because you're hitting these endpoints that are the transactional based, so there is a risk there. That's why it's important to safeguard, like I say, APIs. They all have an endpoint, but they've got to be public, right? Because it's coming from a browser or an application. So so it's getting that balance right. You've got to mitigate that risk. You've got to make sure you put the safeguards in. You've got to do what you need to do for PCI DSS, but you've also got to make it as easy as possible for your consumer, right? Because they're the boss, as my CEO always says.
Well put. That actually is the perfect segue to a topic that I've been curious to talk about. And it's 2025, so you can already guess, I guess, where I'm going. AI is changing the world, right? It's everywhere. Just this morning, I used AI for coding. Frankly speaking, I'm pretty sure, like my dad, like he uses AI to learn Spanish right now. I think it's becoming more and more part of everyone's life, right? I'm curious, right? My hypothesis is, and would love to get your thoughts on this, is I think we're a few months away that we most likely will buy items through an AI interface of our choice, right? Whatever your personal assistant is or chat tool, doesn't really matter. I think it's quite natural, right? That I go in and say, hey, I have my intent. I want to do this. And you just do it. And you never ever go to the store's website. Potentially, right? Maybe for the checkout. I don't know exactly, right? When I say that, right? What is your take on that? And I would love to hear, like you mentioned, like the balance between what the user wants, right? The user wants to have the simplest way to actually do something, at the same time balancing with risk and security at the same time, right? So would love to hear a little bit more about that. Andy, is there, like, when you hear that, well, what do you think of?
Definitely, right. It's become so much easier. If you look over the past 10 years, pre-apps, right, you very rarely transact on a website. You might have put an inquiry in, but then you probably rang up and paid over the phone, right? So I think the ease to transact, certainly smaller items, with your digital wallets, right? Sometimes you don't even have to put in your address. It just pulls it all down from your digital wallet, right? So helps fraud because it's not going to be deviated to a different address, right? So there's that benefit there, but it also helps you because it's like literally a double click on your phone and wow, yeah, didn't really need that extra pair of trousers, but I've got it anyway. But no, I think, yeah, totally. AI, look, I think the twofold. AI is helping us as a company in terms of our day to day. We're a Google house where we leverage Gemini, and I actually use Gemini to tweak my cloud workers. I'll be honest, right? So it's there to help developers, non-developers like myself, there to help people in the office just optimizing efficiencies. So there's everyday uses. That indirectly helps our customers because we get better, we get more efficient. But then the edge stuff, right? The stuff that they're exposed to, and it's all about content at the moment. In my opinion, it's like we've got a product that we need to show at its best. So using AI, and that's something we're looking at currently, using AI for a virtual changing room. So not everyone wants to upload their picture or their shape into AI, but those who do, it will allow them to change different clothes on and impose their face. And I'm not sure if I suit that color. Actually, I do actually suit that color. So that, I mean, there's a sales benefit, right? Obviously, we want to show off our products in the best way and put you in it, right? So you can envisage and understand what it looks like with what you want, and not just a model that doesn't look like you, has a different skin complexion, different hairstyle, so it's kind of making it as real as possible. And there's other benefits in that, right? Aside from the sales, but returns, right? I think everyone returns products, right? They buy the two different sizes or two different colors and the weight to see what it looks like. So if we can reduce that waste and returns, right? So the amount of packages that go back, right? I know it's small, but there's a carbon footprint improvement there, right? And there's a cost improvement because the companies are paying for these free returns, right? Then they've got to reprocess the package, put it back on so yeah, I think customer first, as I mentioned, customer's boss, but then also if we can be more efficient as an organization by reducing these returns, and there's a knock-on improvement for the end user of the company. So yeah, I think multiple facets in how AI will help us. There's more to come, but I think we've got to walk before we can run, and I think that those virtual payments, whilst I love it, Christian, and I can definitely see it, I think it's going to be a little bit further down our journey before we fully engross that one.
Yeah, it's funny, Mark. I mean, as a technologist, and when you step back from things, you kind of always wonder, have we seen this movie before, right? And it's always interesting when I think about like your direct question about how is the way we buy things going to change? And I think the answer is undoubtedly yes, right? But again, if you asked this question a decade ago, I'm pretty sure nobody would have foresaw being able to order things from a large online retailer using Alexa, right? So suddenly you've moved the human compute interface away from the keyboard and the mouse to voice, which in itself, when you think about the technology behind the NLP, I mean, that to me is nearly as mind-blowing as GPS, going right back to the start of today's conversation. But so you look at that and you say, okay, well, that changed and that was pretty cool. And did everybody do it? Well, maybe not. And then you think about what Andy was just talking about with virtual changing rooms, right? And for the last decade, it's been the year of augmented reality, right? Literally every year for the last 10 years, this is the year of augmented reality. This is why we have the metaverse. This is and it didn't quite do it, right? And so you kind of look at those things and you think, all right, so what's next, right? And I actually think, just from my own point of view, when I sort of step back and look at this, I think it's going to come from this notion of hyper personalization, right? From the touch point with the end user, and meeting that end user, or let's say end customer, wherever they want to be met, right? And that's where the omnichannel strategies are important. That's where, understanding the buy-in intent, the buy-in factors, just making things so irresistible as a consumer and irresistibly simple to complete the transaction. I think to me, that's the exciting bit. And then if you move to the sort of the back end question, AI, ML, whatever we want to call it, for optimizing supply chain, for doing the things like Andy's talking about. How can I, get things to the customer quicker, more complete, more fit for purpose? I think all of that is going to be predicated upon a whole new set of, let's say, data-driven insights. I'm going to use that term really, really loosely, that optimize the back end, and it can be right the way from manufacturing. If you keep pulling on that thread, not to use a fashion pun, but if you keep pulling on that thread, you go all the way to where do these things get manufactured? Where do we source the materials? How does that be more sustainable? How does that be more fair for, those who are providing that service? Right the way through to when does it turn up at my door, and all points in between. I think if I look at that from a technology perspective, it's like, wow, that's going to be significantly impacted. So you've got, literally people growing the cotton all the way through to people wearing it, and all of the stuff you need to do in between to get that, from a fashion point of view, to be more immersive and more complete and more successful for the customer and for folks like AllSaints. I just think it's a super cool set of challenges ahead.
Yeah, I fully agree. Andy, Christian, I have one last question for you guys. And this one will be what I call a bit like the quick fire round. So I'll ask you a question and I want you to answer in like 2-3 sentences. The main theme, I think, from our conversation today was transformation. And that is like going from perhaps on-prem to the cloud, going maybe from where we are today and how users buy today to how they might buy in the future, and also how we as businesses operate, becoming more efficient and all those kind of things. It's constant transformation, right? As the technology changes. However, I'm curious, what is like the most crucial non-technical factor that you see that contributes to an organization's success in transformation? What should leaders put emphasis on? Andy, I'll put you first on the spot here.
Yeah, no, to me, it's collaboration. I think quite often tech gets the pressure, right? What's tech going to do for me? How can tech change this? It's like, well, tech can empower a lot of things, but it's got to be driven by the business, right? They've got to say, this is what I want to do. How can you help me? More so than, retrospective thing. I've got this really good tech. How can we put it in our business? It should be what am I trying to achieve first, right? And I think that's where a lot of, and we've done it, we've got kind of lost in the toys and the tools, but not actually thought, well, what do we need? Do we actually need that? Do we need robots in our warehouse picking everything up? Because we're only doing 20 orders a day. Bad example, but so I think collaboration, working with all departments, right? It's not just what finance wants, it's not what marketing wants or customer experience. Collectively, what do we want to deliver with technology? What we're trying to improve, what we're trying to enhance, and so working together is my key non-technical buzzword.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to Andy's, but maybe a different spin on it. I mean, I think first and foremost, I would say, having gone through my own transformation and then worked with many other companies on many others, there is no end to transformation, right? First of all, that's the key takeaway, because there are projects that have an end, there are initiatives that are groups of projects that have an end by definition. But transformation, just like we've seen in the 50, 60 years of modern technology, there is no end. I think what we still have a lot of is resistance to change and a lot of legacy mindset, call it institutional memory, call it institutional knowledge, call it what you like. But I think as we have, a shift now where there's an older demographic moving out of the workforce and ever younger demographics coming in. So you've kind of got the digital immigrants versus the digital natives. I think you can call it that without too much geopolitical concern. What happens in this left-hand end are natural change agents. And I think if organizations can find and strategically deploy those change agents, I think that's where we really see great successes in transformation. It's no good just having it on a whiteboard and an aspiration and a statement. It needs to live and breathe at all levels of an organization. And my experience is that there's a lot of resistance to change up and down in technical and non-technical. And I think anytime you can find and deploy the change agents, and I'm giving you a line in there, Mark, to talk about agents in general, but the change agents are key to any transformation in my experience, and that's very much a cultural shift.
Okay, this was awesome. Andy, Christian, thank you so much for being on. I learned a lot. I enjoyed this a lot. Thank you so much for joining us.
The pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
And to the listeners, also thanks for listening in. Stay subscribed. Join us for the next episode. Thank you so much. See you soon. Cheers.
Thank you for tuning in to the Connectivity Cloud podcast. If you found today's episode valuable, be sure to subscribe so you won't miss future updates. Stay ahead of the curve, stay connected, and stay secure. As always, with Cloudflare.